Hello, welcome once again to the reading room. We're actually in the eponymous reading room, which is the James Reckitt Reading Room in Hull Central Library. I'm here with Hollie McNish. She's been described as a street poet, as a performance poet. I think the best way to describe you is a poet.
Thanks.
And this is your second time in Hull this month.
Yeah, and that was the first time that I'd ever been here, so it's really nice to be back.
And City of Culture, do you think we deserve it?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I just did an Instagram post saying that. I've just been walking around the old town and the museums quarter and stayed near the marina and saw the deep and I had no idea, to be honest, what it was going to be like, and it's really overwhelmed me.
Yes.
So yes.
And a city with a poetic tradition and a poetic culture.
Yeah, which is not something we're sort of told about either, I would say, in our schooling down south, I don't think really.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, it's been lovely. Like the Humber Mouth Festival was brilliant, and it was a gender studies conference today that I was doing a bit of light entertainment at the, the lunchtime break.
I was going to ask what you were doing there.
Great.
So, because you were here for Humber Mouth, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We've got a bit of footage about that. But today, I know you were at a conference because when we were organising this interview. So you were the entertainment. You weren't a speaker as such.
I was down as a speaker on the website, but I was doing it. They had panels and discussions, really interesting discussions, and then at lunchtime there was a 2-hour lunch. So people brought their lunch in, and then I did about half an hour of poems about gender and happiness.
Brilliant. Now, in a little while, I do want to talk to you about your performance, but there was something really interesting that the organiser of Humber Mouth, who thinks you're brilliant, by the way,
that's nice.
and was really keen and really enthusiastic and really chuffed that he'd got you at the festival. But he said something to me which I thought was quite interesting. He said, "Where did you come from?"
Who, me?
Yeah, no, and I don't mean geographically. I mean, how did you get from an unknown poet, because everybody starts off as unknown, to somebody that everybody's talking about? I see you on American websites. You know, sometimes your Facebook, because we're linked in on Facebook. Sometimes it's from you. Sometimes it's from
someone else,
a site completely somewhere else. And I said, YouTube, Facebook.
Yeah.
To be fair, he's not as technically savvy as a lot of people, but that's something that I found really interesting, was that it seems like you created your career using the internet and using YouTube.
Yeah, I didn't really mean to. It was just for practical reasons, really. So when I put my first video, which I think was mathematics, like the first one that's had a lot of views, it was after I'd already been able to quit my day job. So I've been doing it for about 3 years since my first ever read in sort of at the Poetry Cafe in London. First ever time I'd read out to other people. And then 3 years later, just from doing gigs, I'd been asked to do other gigs, and then asked by someone to start doing workshops, so I started doing that. And I was earning all right to kind of quit my job, but I was it was a 3-day week because I had a baby.
Yeah.
So so I thought it's now or never, really. So I quit my job, and then one of the things that I thought I should do if I was going freelance, which is a bit scary, is to start having a sort of timetable of like every week put up one of your poems and just go through all my collection of poems and get them all up on YouTube. So it was totally for that reason, really, to push myself to keep adding things. Because I realised, even though I had 2 albums online, but loads more people watch YouTube than listen to stuff like SoundCloud, even though that's also popular. But I think seeing people is really nice, and poetry especially, it's really nice to see people read the poems. So I just started putting it up, and then mathematics went viral, and then Embarrassed, the poem about breastfeeding, I wasn't going to put up, and my partner was the one that said he thought I should, and I put that up, and that just started getting shared by, I think, every sort of midwife and midwife student and breastfeeding, and people that aren't in that area as well. So I was already working part-time as a poet, but that just kind of skyrocketed everything.
It is really interesting, the interface of modern technology and poetry. Now, we've actually done a show just looking at technology and poetry. So you started off with YouTube as a promotional tool, I suppose, or a way of getting yourself out there.
Yeah, it was sort of that, but also because I didn't like, I didn't grow up going to poetry cafes. I didn't even know anything like that existed until I was about 26 and started getting pushed to go by my partner, basically, pushed to go and read. So we went to the theatre maybe once a year to see a like Rocky Horror Show and stuff like that, but I didn't go to like lectures or book reading, nothing like that at all. Not when I was at school, not when I was at uni, never. And I just thought, I was doing loads of gigs, but then when I was going into schools to do workshops, I was like, there's no connection between these two things. Like, none of these school kids that I'm working with in villages near where I live, they're not going to travel to London to go to a theatre or to go to a poetry cafe, because that's where I was doing it mostly, was in London. So that's why I thought, actually, what do I do when I try and watch things? I go to the television, really, or to magazines, or watch YouTube. Like, I had a baby as well, and it's expensive to go to the theatre or to go to comedy shows, and you can't always do it. And especially, it was when I started writing lots of stuff about parenthood, I thought, I'm doing these poems in places where basically parents mainly don't really go out anymore as much. You can't really kind of tied to your house. So the idea of doing something that, exactly. The idea of just constantly doing gigs like that, I thought, oh, this is silly. So that's why I wanted to do it. I think YouTube's amazing for that. I see so many discussions, so much political things or comedy, or that I would never, ever get a chance to go and see in real life.
So is YouTube now one of your platforms for your poetry? You know, it stands in its own right as a place for your poetry to be disseminated.
I think so. Like, it's totally different, I think, when you see someone live, even from seeing them live, you know, on YouTube. Obviously, that's very different. But for most people, it's not going to be that possible to see a lot of live stuff. So yeah, it is one. And my whole aim was to get every poem that I've done in an album or done in a book to do a reading, all of them. That's like my aim. So that if you want to watch me read the poem, then you can, or if you want to just listen to it, then you can hear it. Or if you want to read it, then you can read it.
And you want to go see you live, you can go see them all live.
So under YouTube, I always put all the words to the poem so that if people want to read it after, or...
Now, however fantastic YouTube is, and thankfully a lot of my videos haven't been popular enough on YouTube to draw down much criticism, you do put your head above the parapet a bit on YouTube, thanks to the wonders of the comments.
Yeah, you can turn them off. You can turn them off. And I always, if I'm talking to young people, especially, like, quite a lot of people ask me, what would you say to like this group of school kids if they want to get into it? And I was like, don't put your stuff on YouTube. Like, start off, share it with people, friends, family, go to... I don't think I had anything on YouTube until at least 2 years of doing gigs to people. And obviously there's other poets that it's totally the opposite. Like, they're on YouTube, but they've never actually done a gig in their life, kind of thing. But the idea of, if I'd have put some of the poems up on YouTube when I first started and got the amount of hate that I got for them, or called whatever it is, slag, whatever you're going to get called, ugly all the time. I don't know if I'd have carried on, really. But after, I don't know, you kind of get used to it. It's not that bad.
But you did have a fantastic conceit in the gig you did for Mouth, which was to actually have your top 5 most hated poems as the first 5 that you performed.
I sort of realised for ages, for about a year, I was just avoiding doing them. And I was acting like it was just because I wanted to do other ones, but it wasn't. I know it was because I was thinking, these must be really offensive. And sometimes I do change poem. Like, if people, I'm not obviously right about stuff all the time. So if people are saying, but what about this, then I do think about it. I don't just, it's not comments that disagree with them. That's the kind of comments I want to read. That's interesting and I want to learn from it. And actually the comments on YouTube have taught me loads about breastfeeding, loads about midwifery, loads about immigration, economics. So I love reading the comments and writing.
So there
back.
are positives.
So you just sort of filter through.
It's not all bile that gets spilled out onto the comments.
No, not at all. And there's lots of positive support, so it's really nice to see that. And you know, sometimes if I read articles on the news, I'll read the comments as much as I'll read the article, because people start having debates, and then you learn from it, don't you?
I occasionally even join in.
Yeah. Well, I like to try and reply to people as well, especially if they're like angrily disagreeing.
Yes. But there was one kind of saving grace and one positive side of the negative comments, if that can possibly be the case, which is I think either one of the ones that got into the top 5 or the one that got it as number 1 got up there because of an argument over the pedantics of grammar.
Yeah, that was hate.
Yes, whether to use hate or hatred. And I thought that was, if there's a positive side to it, at least somebody was being a pedantic over the use of
honestly,
poetic language.
But that, that happens all the time though as well. When you said where are you from?
Yes.
I thought I get comments all the time about my voice.
Right, yes.
On YouTube. And last year I got to the point I was like, I don't know how to talk anymore. I actually don't know how to talk. My family were all Scottish. I was brought up near Reading, live in Cambridge, go to London quite a lot. I go up north quite a lot now. I don't really know how to talk, but a lot of people seem to have quite a problem with my voice. So yeah, that got a bit annoying after a while because every time I was speaking, I was like, am I putting this on? Is this my real accent, or is this more trying to be Scottish, or am I trying to be from London, or am I don't know.
Yes.
So, but I think I'm over that now.
Thinking about how strong your performances are, where's the natural environment, natural element for your poetry? Is it on the page? Is it on the tongue? Is it on the internet?
I don't know. That's a really good answer, isn't it? I don't know. I think it depends on people, how they want to see it. Do I like reading? But I think I like seeing people reading poems more than I like reading them on the page. Actually, yeah, I'm sure I do. I watch way more poetry and see a lot more live poetry than I read. Yeah. Saying that, there's times and places that you just want to sit on the couch and read, or on the train rides when I'm doing tours. I often am reading a lot, not always poetry. I probably more read sort of factual stuff and newspapers and things, but yeah, I think there's a place for everything. I brought out an album about 4 years ago and I recorded them all, but I had quite a lot of people email me to ask for the words or to say you're going to do a book. Yeah. So I did a book, and then I had people email me to say, are you going to record these? Because we're not very good at reading. Yeah. So I think that's a big thing as well, actually. The idea that everyone finds it really easy to read, which is totally not true. It's a massive thing. There's so many people I know who don't get that much pleasure from reading because they find it hard, or because of the language, or because of dyslexia, or because anything, so many different reasons. So for that reason, I always want to put them on YouTube or in some sort of audio format. And
I know when I saw you a couple of weeks ago at the Humber Mouth, it was like you were a little bit ambivalent as to whether you were actually a performer. Which I found completely surprising, because I thought it was one of the most engaging poetic performances I've seen for absolutely ages, especially in Hull. There's a musicality to the way that you perform. Has music influenced the way that you write, perform, create your poetry?
Yeah, I'm sure. I was way more influenced by music or lyrics, I think, than I was by poetry, even though that is poetry, but you know what I mean. Yeah. By poetry as I was growing up, and I still am, I think. I love good lyrics in a song, and I used to print off lyrics and read the lyrics and study. There was a guy, MC Solar, a French rapper, and when I was learning French GCSE, I was totally obsessed with him. And about 10 years later, I got to see him live, but just his words and the way they write, I love it. So I think my style of writing, I think when I started off, it was half music, musical lyrics, and then half probably kids' poetry books. I used to love poetry when it was funny kids rhyming poetry. Dear Mrs. Butler, I loved that poetry book. I read it over and over again when I was a kid. And then it was music, but I never really, not really poetry studied at school.
It's interesting that you mentioned MC Solar, because I know you had, and it wasn't a rant, it was in one of your Facebook posts, you mentioned the fact that people when describing you as a street poet, I think to make it more happening with the kids.
Yeah.
And street poetry and rap seems to be like, if we say it's a bit like rap, then the kids will enjoy it, they won't think it's so poetry. Although it's musical, I was thinking, I can get a feel of kind of rap about it, but it's not, and I couldn't work out where it was from, and I wonder if it was because you were listening to French rap music, because the French language is much more fluid, it has far fewer kind of heavy beats to it, and your performance has always seemed quite kind of supple and subtle, so I wondered if that's...
I've never really thought about that. I think, to be honest, like I say MC Solar because I remember printing off a lot of his lyrics, but I wasn't like drowned in him the whole time, so I wasn't listening to loads and loads
of... It's another way of performing words that we're not always familiar with in the kind of the English way of speaking. The English language tends to have a little bit of a gallop to it that the French doesn't really have.
Yeah, I see that. I've to be honest, this thing that I think about rap music is that it's a real skill to have. I think I mean, I don't like it all, don't get me wrong, and there's some that's terrible, I think. But the idea of somebody saying that I can rap, like I really can't, and I hate having to keep onto a beat. I feel really constricted. I can't stop if people laugh. I don't write in bars. Like, it's really different. And I feel like whenever people say that, like, not in a bad way, because obviously it's a rhythmical way of talking and reading poems, but I feel like just showing them like a video of like Chester P or Inja or Fallacy or Gets, or like there are so many amazing UK like rappers, and it's such a skill to keep on the beat, and I think if you took the music away, their words totally make the rhythm, like you can hear it so well. Which so I don't think I'm as skilled in that art at all. I mean, I'd love to be, but there's a difference. I've done a show, Poets versus Rappers, and there's a poet, Rosie Carrick, that they do it in Brighton a lot, and it's brilliant actually to see the difference when you take away the music, the rapper's music, and they stand up. Like, it still doesn't sound like, but there's still quite a big difference. Obviously, it's
I think they inform each other quite a lot, but I think you're right. I think they are two distinct forms.
Rap is poetry. But I don't think poetry is rap.
Yes, a good way of putting it.
Makes sense.
It makes absolute sense, and I think you're absolutely right. The last thing I want to say about your actual performances, and it's a technical question that I just wonder how you do it, how you know it. You're right, your rhythms and your pacing is very elastic, and it goes with the... How can you speak so quickly and yet be so... the meaning of what you're saying be so precise and so clear, and every single word go into the brains of us in the audience? How do you know that there's a bit that you can perform at a rate that you think would be impossible to comprehend, and yet it all kind of sits in our brains?
It's funny you say that, because when I first started, my mum just kept saying, like, slow down, because I was nervous, more nervous, so I'd read really quickly. Now I think it's just how I would think it. I think. Like, sometimes I feel like it's a bit too fast, and I've had a few people say, I can't catch what you're saying, and that's why they want it on paper sometimes, because I think I heard it but I didn't hear everything. But I just think I don't know, it kind of speaks for itself. There's certain parts of the poem that I feel like this is quite a slow image, and I'm talking about something that I'd like to take my time over, and then the sort of fast-pacedness, if it fits with the theme of what I'm talking about, I guess. But I don't know, I guess that comes back to the idea of not being a performer. I don't think of myself as a performer, but that's only because there's such a rigid thing sometimes about, are you a performance poet? Are you a spoken word artist? Are you a poet? Are you a page poet? It's like, there's not these strict categories. I feel like sometimes performing or a performance poet is sometimes defined as people that write poems to perform, like someone would write a script for a theatre, whereas I don't do that. So I sort of always say I'm not a performance poet, because I want people to know that I'm not writing this in order to read it out. I've got hundreds of poems that I'll write that I don't ever share with people. And also because I read, and that used to be a bit of a like, Holly, if you want to be a performance poet, you need to learn how to take away your book and not read from it, which is fine if I had time in my life to learn all my poems all the time, or if I had a set of 10 poems, which I always did, but I don't. I love choosing between about 55 poems, and I just can't. I just don't have time.
I see what you mean, 'cause
I've got a kid, I've got a job.
Yes.
Like, I don't understand.
But there were poems that you
memory.
recited, read, performed without looking.
Yeah,
at the
like
page.
I don't always look at it.
Yeah,
it's
you know
just
it's
I'd rather have it there in case I forget it.
Yes.
And because I feel like, you know, people have made an effort to come out. They've paid money. They've taken up their time.
Yeah.
And if I forget something, which I do a lot, like there are people that are amazing, like Luke Wright, poet. He like learns a whole hour show like that. It seems, but I just find it really difficult to do, especially after getting less sleep now I've had a kid.
Yes. And time.
Yeah.
Yes. So we talked about kind of musicality in your performances and how you're influenced by your knowledge and appreciation of music. One of the things that kind of popped into my head when I was thinking about how to describe you was like a rock and roll poet, not because you get up on stage and do gigs, which is important, but also the way that you use YouTube, use technology, use albums are part of your medium.
Yeah.
You communicate with fans in a way that a lot of other poets maybe wouldn't do.
Yeah.
Has the way musicians connect with their fans, get out and do it, create their own albums, has that kind of influenced the way that you work as a poet?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also because my partner is a musician.
Yes.
So he's a drum and bass, he always tells me off if I say that. He's a bass music MC.
Right.
Which includes drum and bass.
Yes.
Sorry. But yeah, so when I started doing gigs, he was immediately like, record some. Like, let's record some, and you should put a CD together that people can download. And like, even one of them was for charity, so every 500 quid it goes to a different kids charity, the poem about having a kid. And then he was just like, it was easy to do it, just do it. I think that's quite a big difference. Once I started doing that, and people started emailing me, and then putting things on YouTube. It frustrates me actually that some people don't. I don't mean that everyone should use YouTube, use all those sort of social networks, but I know so many amazing poets that I see at gigs, and when I ask them if they've got a book or a CD or a download, like anything I could find online to show people, to share with people, and they don't. And even some after like 3 years, they don't. And it's not, if it's a conscious decision that you don't want it, that's fine. But a lot of the time it's not just because it's hard to access a recording studio but it's like anything, it seems quite easy now to just take a video and like, put it up. So yeah, I think in that way, musicians are probably a bit more, I don't know, they're just a bit better at putting themselves out there. Yeah, maybe because it's meant more for entertainment as well. So you think, you wouldn't just play a song, like you want people to hear it. Whereas when you're a poet, sometimes I think, I don't know, with me, sometimes it felt a little self-indulgent to think that anyone's going to care about what I'm talking about. Like, it's not like you can dance to my poems or anything. So you think, am I going to put this poem up about, being traumatised about a fight I had 10 years ago with someone who... So I think in that case, there's a bit more of a barrier towards thinking that there's a point in sharing it, but there is. Like, poetry is just as
and there are, as somebody who's advised musicians for the New Deal, as it happens, there are plenty of bedroom musicians that never let their music out. But you're right, the majority of them, it's part of the way of being as a musician. As you do gigs, you do demo tapes, and maybe back in the old days you couldn't distribute them. Now, because you can stick them on SoundCloud, on YouTube, wherever, then the world's full of musicians putting it out there, I suppose.
I guess I meant if it was, not people, obviously there's lots of people that will be sort of musicians, like closet musicians, but then that's the same with poetry, and with me, with a lot of my poems, you just write it for pleasure and you just leave it at that. But with the poets that are already gigging and they're, sort of making a living from gigging in workshops, they're the ones that I'm like, get something that I can see, even a free download if you don't want to sell it or...
Yes. Now, some of the poetry that's been spread the most widely, and it's what happens is with things like YouTube is you put it out there and it's down to everyone else to make it bigger.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, I remember the mathematics one. I think the one on breastfeeding was the one that went onto Upworthy, which is an American website.
Yeah, it did, which went...
Yes. Are you a feminist poet?
I knew that was going to come into it. Yeah, I reckon. I can't really say no, can I? 10 years ago, if you'd have asked me the question, I'd have said no.
Yeah.
Well, if you'd have said, are you a poet, I'd have said no as well. But like, it's not like I've been brought up listening to Jermaine Greer. Like, my mum is a lovely woman. She's a nurse, she works hard, but she would never say that she was a feminist, I don't think. I don't know. I don't think many people in my family would, maybe my cousin. But yeah, so it had that like stigma with me totally as I was growing up. If anyone said that at school, that's not the question you ask, is it? When you're 15, then are you coming to the party? I don't think anyone asked me if I was a feminist when I was at school. We didn't really talk about that. But yeah, well, I guess it gets talked about a bit more now, I think. So yeah, I think I am. Like, I read quite a good article that said, like, if you are pleased that you can go to school, you can read and write, you can't, you know, be raped legally by your husband, you can have your own bank account. Like, really, I've got to be quite grateful for what people have done. It would be a bit silly to say no, I think.
And politics?
No, I don't think. I know. No. It would be silly to say no, yes, I am. But sometimes it's just, I feel like I write about lots and lots of things. And even after writing loads about immigration, studying a lot about immigration, about economics, which I write about, or about nature, like all those things, sometimes I feel like you're sort of discarding these poems that I write about class or that I write about that. But yeah, so I'd say a lot of my poems are feminist. I'm a feminist poet, thinking about class issues as well.
Are you more than a feminist poet?
I'm more.
Yes.
No, that's a big thing, but I just feel like, don't ignore the other issues, because there are obviously issues to do with women's rights, a lot of issues, but there are also a lot to do with race and a lot to do with class and lots and lots of other things.
Yeah, and
we can't separate them.
And personal things in the personal life, which I know the personal is, if anybody's shown that the personal is political, which was a phrase that I remember when I was young, it's a lot of your poetry which does have a strong personal voice, but has a social and political context, I suppose.
It is, though. Everything is political. I've known so many people that say, like, or whatever your views about voting, but that they're not interested in politics, or they don't vote because it's not really them, it's not really for them. And I can see why you say it when you know, see Newsnight, or you see politicians sort of waving their hands and banging as if it's some sort of fun debating club at Eton. But it is, like, if you use the doctor, if you go to hospital, if you have been to school, like anything, that's all decided by politics. It annoys me that there's this idea that politics is for certain people because it affects everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Another big interest, bricks.
It was when you perform the poetry, bricks, which is fantastic, and again a very personal poem.
Yeah, that's
but
embarrassing
about. I don't think it's embarrassing. I think it's a really good poem. I think it was one that you ended on, wasn't it?
I can't.
I know we had a say, but we didn't know what the poems were going to be. But we, as the audience, you gave us the opportunity to choose your last poem. We basically just chose all the ones that you offered us because we didn't want you to stop, basically. But then we were talking earlier before the interview about architecture and your interest in architecture. Just tell us a little bit about that.
About the architecture,
about your love of architecture.
They're not totally combined.
They're similar, but not complete. They're not a total overlap between your brick fetish, which is what it is in the poem, and your love of architecture.
So the brick thing is mainly about crumbly, mouldy bricks, which actually someone today said she had the same thing. So she could totally relate to it, about crumbling coal. She used to eat crumbling coal when she was pregnant. But yeah, the architecture thing is I worked in an architecture centre for like 6 years. So that was what my day job was as I was getting more and more gigs doing poetry. And it was I loved the job. It was all about urban planning and I did a little bit about sort of the effect of different planning on culture or on crime, and yeah, I just think it's fascinating. But my main role was in education, so it was in getting more young people, even sort of primary school age, to get more involved in town planning. So if there were, normally if there's a new estate being built or whatever, they ask people to come and look at the design, but they never ask young people. Yeah. Or, lots of people that are working also can't get to see them, but they never ask for young people's opinion. Like, you don't have to, the government has no regulation that you have to, and especially not primary school kids. So we used to do consultations with them, which I loved. But it was also because I wanted to get experience in a charity, and I could not afford to do a free internship, which seemed to be the only possible other way in. So yeah, it was a local charity, but then it increased my love of architecture.
Yes. And one last thing that I'm going to ask you about in the libraries, because when I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about where the interview was going to be, and we talked about libraries, and both of us love libraries.
Yeah, amazing.
Yep, libraries as a place, not where you just consume culture, but create culture. Yeah. Just tell us about your work patterns and how you use libraries in work.
Yeah, I basically use my local library all the time. I go there with my daughter. I get books out every week. I get fines every week, possibly, but that's totally my own fault.
I like to think that I'm helping fund the library through my own forgetfulness.
I think it's fine. That's the only place I don't really mind paying fines to. So I reckon I'll go to them about once a week and do my work there and research from them. It's perfect. Before I even thought about it, I used to go into cafes or try and find places that have internet, because I can't really work from home very easily, and it's just brilliant. I say it's always full. My local library, I don't know about other people's, but it's just totally always full of people working, students, kids. I love it. Brilliant. Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. You and me both. So Hollie, thank you so much for joining us here on the
Reading
Room.
It was lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.